and welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be the start of a new series for me, and this is going to be a true crime series. And for my first case that we're going to discuss, this one's kind of confusing. It's solved, but it's not. This case leaves you wondering if the correct decisions were made. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Specifically on this one, I chose this case because it's close to home. Literally, the town that this took place in is Lakeville, Indiana, and Lakeville is probably about like 20 minutes from me, 15-20 minutes, not far at all. I would like to do a disclaimer at the beginning of this as well, and I'm going to do this on every single case that I do. The things that I'm going to discuss are things that I did compile and find online. I am putting all this information together. It's not just one source. I'm looking at multiple, 3, 4, 5 different sources just to try and back each other and see what's missing out of this story and what's missing out of that story. So to try and get a full scope of what happened. I don't mean any disrespect whatsoever. I'm definitely not saying that somebody's guilty, and I'm definitely not saying somebody's not guilty. I just want to tell this story. Today we're talking about the Pelley family murders. And this dates back to 1989 in Lakeville, Indiana. So we're going to start with Robert Pelley. Robert Pelley and his wife had 2 children, Jackie, the youngest, and the oldest was Jeff. Now, unfortunately, in 1985, Robert Pelley's wife died from cancer in 1985. He eventually ended up remarrying less than a year later to a woman named Dawn. Weirdly enough, Dawn's husband passed away in 1985 as well. Dawn had 3 children of her own as well. Her youngest daughter was Jolene, her middle daughter was Janelle, and her oldest daughter was Jessica. So Jackie and Jeff didn't really seem to be very happy about their father getting married so quickly after their mother passed away. So Jackie and Jeff were, I believe, 10 and 14 when Dawn and Robert got married. And they were not happy about it. They felt like their father was moving on too fast. And so there was kind of some stress and tension between the family, the blended family. Some of the articles that I've read have stated that Jackie said that, they didn't really see eye to eye on everything, but that's normal. Like Dawn's kids were being raised completely differently than what they had been raised. So they were just not sure how to take it. Now, allegedly, Robert had been working in Florida prior to getting married. He was actually working at a Florida bank that allegedly had ties to drug dealers. And just before Robert had moved from Florida back to Indiana, he actually got called into work at the bank super late at night. It was like around midnight or so because they were being audited and they had found $1 million was missing and they assumed embezzlement. Robert actually helped them track down and investigate to see where this money actually went. Shortly after that, he moved back to Indiana. Now, in moving back to Indiana, Robert actually, felt like he had a different kind of calling, and he actually became a minister of a church in Lakeville. It was called the Olive Branch Church. And because Robert was the minister, him and his family got to live in the parsonage that was just next door to the church. Him and his family got very close over that time with the community and the people within the community, and they really relied on him as a minister and as a church leader. There was a lot of people that looked up to him. Now, keep in mind with this story, I'm going to be just going with the flow of this storyline, and I'm going to be taking, like I said, multiple sources and putting them together to show the bigger picture of the story, because there were some things that I'm going to say that were not admissible in court. And I think that really, whether it's admissible or not, but knowing the entire scope and the entire story of everything that kind of contributed to a specific situation, or even maybe it didn't contribute, but it was just a part of that could have possibly maybe had an effect on the story, is very important to hear. So please keep that in mind. I am not trying to offend anybody. Going with the story. Okay, So I'm going to try my best to try and explain a little bit more about the kids and their interactions and their involvement in the community and within the family. Jessica was the oldest of Dawn's daughters. She was 5 when her dad passed away. In 1989, when this event happened, she was 9 years old. Her and her middle sister shared a best friend named Stephanie, and they were always out in the field, farm girl stuff, country girl stuff, running around in fields. They spent a lot of their time outside and together. In the months leading up to this incident, Jeff, which is, if you remember right, Robert's oldest son, Jeff and his dad really weren't getting along very well from reports of what people were saying and witnesses. They just weren't really getting along. There was a lot of arguing. In fact, early April, Jeff was arrested for burglary. Could you imagine being the minister's son and being arrested for burglary? What kind of shame your family could possibly feel? What kind of shame your parents would feel? Being a minister, I'm sure that Robert felt very compelled to make an example out of his son. And so because of that, he actually grounded Jeff in April because he was arrested for burglary. And unfortunately for Jeff, prom was coming up. The weekend of April 28th, 1989, that weekend was supposed to be prom. Robert said, no way are you going, and that's final. You're definitely not doing this. Jeff ended up calling his date to prom and let her know that, hey, my dad changed his mind. He said I can go. Not a problem. I'm really excited. So for that weekend now, the entire family pretty much had plans. So Jeff was going to prom. His oldest stepsister, Jessica, was going to go stay at a friend's house. And Jeff's younger sister, Jackie, actually had church camp that weekend. So everybody was pretty much busy until Sunday. Okay, so prom was April 29th, 1989, on a Saturday. Very early that morning, Jeff, Robert's oldest son, went to work at McDonald's, came back home. Robert when he went to work, he started telling everybody, hey, my dad's letting me go to the prom. I'm so excited. Just don't say anything, though, because, he's kind of, a little sore about it. So let's just not say anything. But Dad said I can go. So that morning on Saturday, all of Jeff's friends, after he got home from work, all of his friends were stopping by, showing off their dresses and their tuxes, and it was just a good time. They wanted to show the minister, hey, we're really excited, and that's really what it was about. They wanted to show the minister that they were excited and show him their outfits and see what he thought, and it was just an exciting time. I mean, who's not excited for prom? Okay, I wasn't, but whatever. I'm the exception. The last person that was at the Pelley house to show their prom outfits left at about 5:10, 5:15. Jeff left, went to his date's house. They went to the prom, and they went to dinner. They went to dinner in South Bend, Indiana, and then went back to Lakeville, and then they went to the prom. After prom, they had a sleepover, and then the next day, there was actually a senior trip. They were all going to Great America out by Chicago, to celebrate. Something strange happened during their time at Great America. So it is said that Jeff's date stated that when they were at Great America, Jeff started getting kind of weird, getting distant, and he randomly made a comment stating that he felt like something bad happened at home, like something really bad. And he was just very ominous about it. Now, if you back it up, in Lakeville, that morning, if you can remember correctly, Dawn's oldest daughter, Jessica, and her middle daughter, Janelle, had a best friend named Stephanie. They all obviously went to church together. Jessica, over the weekend, again, stayed at a friend's house. Jackie, which is Jeff's, there's a lot of J's here. Jackie, which is Jeff's younger sister, was at church camp all weekend, so they were gone. Of course, Sunday morning, Stephanie's by herself, but hey, she's still gonna go to church. Every Sunday, she usually goes to church at about 9:15. Prior to church, she will go next door to the parsonage to go see the Pelley's family, and to go see the minister and the minister's wife, because she said they usually make a huge spread for breakfast. They'll make a huge breakfast. Everybody kind of comes in and just talks and amongst themselves prior to Sunday morning service. This morning on April 30th, 1989, Stephanie went to church and she ran next door like she usually does every Sunday. And she knocked on the Pelley's door and nobody answered. Everybody's car was there except for Jeff's, and she was kind of confused, and the door was locked, and she thought, okay. So she actually, in fact, went back to the church and kind of told everybody. She's like, hey, it's kind of weird, like the door is locked. I think they're sleeping in, was what she really thought at the time. The congregation, after a while at this point, the entire congregation was there waiting, and the minister never showed, and they obviously got extremely worried. After waiting a short time, the trustees from the church actually got the master key for the parsonage next door, and they went next door again and knocked on the doors to no answer, and they ended up unlocking the door and going inside. When they came back, they walked all the way back to the church, and they asked the entire congregation to go up to the altar and begin to pray, because that family needed some prayers right now. What they found was Robert Pelley was shot with a shotgun twice upstairs, and down in the basement they found Dawn, his wife, and her two youngest girls, which was Janelle and Jolene. They were also shot to death. Meanwhile, Jeff is at Great America, and he is actually found at the amusement park in order to bring him home to tell him what had happened to his family. And that's exactly what happened. If you remember correctly, Jessica was out at a friend's house all weekend. She is 9 years old, and her mom's friend was driving her home that morning to get back before the church service, and they pulled up to the neighborhood, and there were just police cars everywhere. And her mom's friend gets out of the car to see kind of what's going on and goes to talk to a police officer. And she said she remembers her mom's friend just standing there just bawling, with tears just rushing down her face. After speaking with the police officer, her mom's friend came around to her side of the car and opened up the door, and that's when she told her that her entire family was gone. Unfortunately, the police were never able to find the murder weapon. It was a 20 gauge shotgun. That's the most that they could tell. And coincidentally, Robert Pelley's 20 gauge Mossberg shotgun that he usually had on his gun rack was missing. And they still, to this day, have not recovered it. There is so little evidence in this case. That's what makes it so confusing and so not sure what happened, not clear as to what really happened. And there was a lot of factors to that. Now, on May 1st, 1989, the police actually interviewed Jeff, Robert's oldest son, interviewed him in the presence of his grandparents. They flat out asked him, did you have anything to do with this? And his response was, no, we argue, we disagree, but I would never do something like this. The investigators kind of found this a little strange because his reaction to everything was so matter of fact, to the point that he didn't cry, he didn't tear, he did not seem remorseful whatsoever. He seemed very distant. Even on May 3rd, 1989, when his parents and his two stepsisters had their funeral with a closed casket nonetheless because of a shotgun wound, people made comments that he was just very distant and not really present during that time. And I know that everybody kind of grieves differently, so I can have a lot of understanding for some of that. But whenever you look at things in a combined manner, investigators were immediately suspicious of Jeff and the timeline in which everything kind of worked out. On April 28th, he was talking to his dad, trying to see if he would be willing to give him some time to go to the prom and not have to have his dad drive him. That was the day that he was going to have that conversation with his dad. The next day, if you remember correctly, Jeff's friends came over to show off their prom gear, their prom outfits, and they were really excited. They saw the minister, they saw the minister's wife, and at 5:10, 5:15, the last visitor left. And it is said that Jeff's father said that he could not go to the prom unless he allowed his dad to drive him and his date to prom. He was not doing the pre-prom dinner. He was not going to be going to the senior after party, and he was definitely not going to be going to Great America the next day. That was his intentions. In fact, Robert told somebody else that just to make sure that Jeff didn't just grab the keys in the middle of the night and take off, he actually took a part off of the Mustang that they had to make sure that he couldn't go anywhere. When Jeff's friends came over to show off their prom outfits to the minister, Jeff was seen wearing a blue and pink shirt, and I believe it was black shorts or black pants. And at about 5:35, Jeff called his date and called her from a payphone at an Amoco, stating that his car was actually not running properly, so he stopped so that he could see if he could fix it really quick, and that he was going to be there within 10 minutes. Later, he had told police that he was actually at Casey's gas station and was working on his car there. When confronted with the fact that he was at the Amoco and not the Casey's, he said, "Oh yeah, well, I had broke down at the Amoco, but I stopped at Casey's to get something to drink." Police said, "Well, Amoco sells drinks too, so that's strange." Another thing that they noted was when he showed up at his date's house, he wasn't wearing his tux. He actually was wearing a black t-shirt and a pair of jeans. Remember, 25 minutes ago, he was wearing a blue and pink shirt and black pants. So he had to get dressed in his tux at his date's house, and his date's parents and his date actually thought that it was kind of strange that his parents weren't getting first prom pictures or prom pictures in general or any kind of pictures of him in his tux. He just kind of left and didn't get any kind of memorable picture, obviously because he wasn't in his tux. So, and because of the fact that plans changed all of a sudden, at this point the police were extremely suspicious of Jeff. They went to the prosecutor actually and talked to them about that and said, "Look, he has a motive. He had tendencies prior to that to be kind of violent, and he was disagreeing with his father a lot, and this was all over prom," was their conviction really. They felt as though that he murdered his family. He got into an argument with his dad upstairs and ended up shooting him once in the chest and then another in the head. Because he did that, he had to go downstairs and finish off the witnesses. And that is what they took to the prosecutor. Because they said, "Look, 20 minutes prior to that, he was in a different outfit. He was lying about where he was at, all these things adding up." And they just, said, "Look, we've got to get this guy." And at the time, the prosecutor said, "No way." Back in 1989, he said, "Absolutely no way. There is not nearly enough evidence to get him or charge him with anything." He said a lot of this is just circumstantial evidence, a lot of hearsay and a lot of feelings. Dawn, Robert, Jolene, and Janelle were all buried May 3rd in the same church that Robert was actually a minister of, right next to the house that they were murdered in. It was a standing room only, and Jessica remembers that there were just news reporters everywhere, lights flashing. Jackie at the funeral seemed to be very shaken. She was just devastated. And Jeff, again, Jeff was very distant, not mentally present in the moment. So after that, of course, the police were questioning everybody, especially Jeff. But they also interviewed Jessica and asked her what she thought had happened. And her theory was that she honestly thought that Robert just killed the family. And the police were very quick to rule this out because they said, "No way. Absolutely no way. There was no murder weapon even found in the house. There's no way that Robert would be able to survive hiding the weapon, and then coming back and dying on the floor. There's just no way." After that, of course, as I said before, there was not enough evidence. It was all circumstantial, and no prosecutor would have taken it at the time. When Jessica was 15, she actually finally received a phone call from her older stepbrother, Jeff. Now, Jeff had moved down to Florida and actually began doing IT work, computer work. I mean, he had a great computer job. He had a wife named Kim, and he was just living his life and doing his thing. And he called Jessica when she was 15, said, "Hey, I would love for you to come down and visit. We haven't seen or talked to each other in a long time. I think you should come down and visit." So, and Jessica stated that when she went down to visit, like almost immediately, he jumped on her and was like, "Who do you think killed our parents?" And she immediately said, "I think Robert did it. I think that your dad did it because your dad would spank me a lot. He was super mean and just didn't really care for us. And I could really tell. And I think that it was just too much for him and he just killed everybody." And after that, they just dropped it. They just stopped talking about it. Jeff didn't really continue the conversation. Apparently, he'd gotten the answer that he was looking for, and just stopped discussing it. So fast forward, 2002, detectives show up on Jessica's doorstep. They came to let her know that they're actually just reopening the case. They asked her, "Who do you suspect could have possibly done something like this?" And now her answer changed, and she said, "I think it actually could have been Jeff, because he had a short temper, was extremely quick to do violent things like that, and I could definitely see him doing it. And he had a time frame and he had a motive." This is when detectives wanted to let her know a little bit more about the case and the details. That's when they told her about the fact that Jeff was grounded a couple weeks prior to the prom, and him and his dad had gotten into an argument, and they just assumed that that was what it was all about in the time frame, and him acting weird at Great America. All of these things combined made them really just focus in on Jeff. So 13 years later, investigators took all this information to the new prosecutor that was in town. They were able to arrest Jeff on 4 counts of murder. So Jeff told police that he actually left his parents' house around 5, and that there's no possible way that he could have done it because he was gone and out of the house. Now, a witness that drove by stated that they saw Jeff's car still sitting outside and that he must have been home. However, he didn't show up to his girlfriend's house until 5:45, and he didn't even have his tux on. He was wearing a different outfit than what he was wearing 40 minutes prior to that. It was really strange that he didn't get any pictures with his parents. It was just not the common, normal thing, I guess. Now, in court, Jessica was pulled to testify against Jeff, and during her testimony, she said that he absolutely just refused to even look at her while she was speaking. So some pieces of evidence that Jessica brought to the table was the fact that before she left to go to her friend's house that weekend, and stay for the sleepover, she distinctly remembered the gun rack and remembered that there was a crossbow, but there was also the 20 gauge shotgun that was now missing. Police were able to obviously find the rack, but there was no shotgun there. And during his questioning, Jeff actually stated, "If I tell you what happened, will I get the electric chair?" That right there kind of makes you feel like you know the truth and you're not telling, right? So Jeff, this guy's looking kind of guilty, but there isn't a lot of evidence. I mean, as far as fingerprints, DNA, eye account witness, anything like that that really connects him. Police did find his blue and pink shirt and the pants that he had worn in the dryer at his parents' residence. So the clothes he was wearing that day were washed and in the washer. They tried to test the washer to see if there was any kind of residual leftover blood, and they were unable to find anything, actually. So with that being said, then I read, more into other stories of what was happening and what people are saying, because you only get one side, you get another side. Like I said, I just want to put it all together. And I'm sorry if I'm looking down. I do have my notes here that I want to read off of because I made a huge stack of notes on stuff, so I'm taking this seriously. Things that were left out, that were not admissible and not usable by the defense team. are as follows. First of all, the defense team said, ever since day one, the investigators and police that were involved in this immediately assumed it was Jeff and refused to investigate anybody else, and in doing so, kind of cut their foot off. I mean, if they had any other leads on anybody else, possibilities of finding evidence, the fact that they didn't look into anybody else means that they kind of missed out on something. So there are actually two key pieces of evidence that were excluded and not allowed or admissible in court during this that I think was really important, that should have been included, especially if a lot of this other circumstantial evidence was going to be allowed. If you remember back at the beginning of the story, Robert, after the murders, had moved down to Florida and was working in a bank, and there was kind of some sketch stuff going on. They thought it was, kind of drug lord, drug dealer affiliated. So he was kind of into some sketchy dealings, and that fact was not included in the information that was given at court. Another thing that was not included, that specifically Robert received a letter, a threatening letter, stating that he was going to be harmed or his family was going to be harmed in some certain way. Now, I don't know if it would have been correlated or related to the fact that he helped investigators find who was embezzling money. I don't know if that was related, or it could be drug dealer related, or who knows. I mean, it could have been a hit job. It's a possibility, because the police were saying that they thought that there was two people that did this job. This is when things get kind of like, oh, well, maybe kind of. I don't know how to feel about this, because I could see that happening. Jeff doing that. I could see his motive. I could see all of that, but I can't really grasp the time frame between 5:05, 5:10, and him arriving at his date's house at 5:45. Between that time, 35 minutes, he would have had to change his clothes, ran a cycle through the washer, put his clothes in the dryer, got rid of the shell casings because those were never found, hide the gun and get rid of that because that was never found, among a few other things. Oh yeah, and he had to put the part that was missing out of his car or not working, that, remember, because his dad said he was going to take a part out of the car so that he can't drive it, he would have had to fix that. All within 35 minutes. He would have probably had to have taken a shower at that point too. I don't see that time frame working out. Maybe the time frame is wrong. I mean, maybe people are not remembering times correctly. Maybe it was a hit job. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was retaliation for what happened in Florida with Robert. And this is all speculation. These are all just my personal theories. My name is Rachel, and these are my theories. Other pieces of evidence that weren't included were also the fact that Jeff didn't have any bruising from, if he were to use a shotgun, he didn't have any bruising on his body. And apparently there was an inconsistency between Jackie's story and Jessica's story of seeing or not seeing the shotgun in the rack that was on the wall that was never found. And another thing, there was allegedly people that saw very strange vehicles that were sitting outside of the parsonage that had Florida plates days prior to the murders. Another big thing that I didn't, which is unfortunate, I didn't find a ton of information on, but apparently another person has since admitted to doing these crimes. He was the one that admitted to actually murdering the Pelley family. Jeff went to trial in 2007 for these murders, and he was convicted of all four and received 160 years in prison. He immediately appealed that, and it is still a work in progress that they are still trying to appeal. And there are new things coming through this year, in fact, which coincidentally, I just so happened to stumble across this, and there was an update in this story about 2 months ago. So it's a revolving door, and I will, of course, update later on. Okay, so overall, there's just so much information to this story, but yet there's not enough information. I don't think enough investigating was done, honestly, to make a conclusive answer. I think that the Florida avenue should have been investigated a little further. That could have given us a lot of answers. Fingerprints. I mean, what? There's so many questions about this one, and I don't, I don't know. I don't know. Personal opinion. It's all personal opinion and theories, but my theory is on this, keeping it middle ground here. I don't feel like there was enough research and enough investigation into this to make a definitive choice either way. So I don't believe, honestly, that Jeff should be in prison right now. Don't feel like he should be out of prison though either. It's a tough one. Oh my gosh, please, please, please help me in this one. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. What are your thoughts? Do you think Jeff did it? Do you think there was enough motive there to do it? What do you think about Florida? I mean, there's so much to this. And I definitely wanted to cover this one because it is very close to home. And it's a story I've never heard. I've lived that close since 1985 myself. So very strange to never have heard of this story. An absolute terrible tragedy definitely came out of this. I will keep you posted with any kind of updates. I will do an update video at some point. Let me know your thoughts down below. And I hope you enjoyed my first true crime video and first part of this series. If you like this, let me know. If you have any case suggestions, let me know. I would love to hear back from you. Thank you for joining me, guys. I'm Rachel Clemens. See you next time.